evening and welcome to tonight's edition of Resistance TV. This evening we're going to be discussing whether worker cooperatives have the potential to bring about an irreversible shift in the balance of wealth and power. We should have two guests with us, although we only have one online at the moment. We're hoping that Ross Ashcroft will join us a little later. But our first guest is John Atherton. He's the head of membership at Cooperatives UK, which is an organisation that helps people establish worker cooperatives. People may be familiar with Ross Ashcroft. He's a broadcaster and co-founder of Renegade Inc., who made the seminal documentary called The Four Horsemen, which shone a light on the broken banking system. Obviously, John, we're going to have to start with you because we don't have another guest. But I was struck by the Labour Party manifesto in 2017, particularly, which had a very clear commitment to worker cooperatives. And I'll just read you the passage from that particular manifesto and then compare that with the manifesto from 2019. In 2017, the manifesto said, in government, Labour would give more people a stake and a say in our economy by doubling the size of the cooperative sector and introducing a right to own, making employees the buyer of first refusal when the company they work for is up for sale. And it went on to say in the 2019 manifesto, we will give a new cooperative development agency a mission to double the size of the cooperative sector, but it had dropped the commitment to give workers the right to buy out their company and establish a worker cooperative. So I just wondered what your thoughts were about the cooperative movement and what the potential is really to grow it, particularly in light of the ever increasing number of people who are forced into self-employment. Perhaps we could start there really, and whether or to really get your thoughts really on helping and encouraging people to look at establishing worker cooperatives in the first instance, rather than necessarily being forced into self-employment, which, as we know, many people, probably millions of people, would rather they were in an employee situation, or possibly be preferred to establish a cooperative if they had the wherewithal and the support to be able to do so.
Yeah, so just to start, obviously we welcome any mention of co-ops in any manifesto, obviously particularly the Labour Party manifesto. Our sister organisation, the Co-op Party, works really hard to work with the Labour Party. And so, yeah, we're Co-ops UK, we're basically about helping people solve problems and solve problems through setting up co-ops. That might be, and there's lots of different sorts of co-ops, but in this instance, it's usually solving the problem of I need a job, and not just I need any job. I want a job that's got decent pay, decent conditions, and there's a mission to it. You know, we're not just doing it for the cash, we're doing it because we believe in what we're doing. So we help people set up worker-owned co-ops, basically.
Yeah, I mean, the cooperative movement's got quite a tradition in this country, hasn't it? And, you know, going back well over a century, I suppose, 150 years ago, were the origins of the cooperative movement. I wonder if you could perhaps give us some of the historical context as well about the co-op movement in this country.
Yes, well, my organisation, Co-ops UK, we're 150 years old this year, actually. And yeah, the first co-op in Rochdale was in 1844. And there's a lot of similarities, actually, between then and now. Then there was huge industrial change. You know, then it was technological change in factories and machinery. Now it's obviously AI and robots. Back then there was a huge issue around food security, food poverty. Then it was more adulteration of food. Now, of course, we're talking about chlorinated chicken. Back then there was a huge shift of people into precarious work, away from artisan weavers and artisan other roles into working in factories. And again, like then, there was a huge inequality issue. There was a growing poverty, growing poor people, and increasing wealth of factory owners and mill owners. And so really the co-op movement back then was a response to all of those issues and all of those problems normal everyday people faced. And again, probably similar to back then, the government wasn't very effective at the time. Banks weren't very effective at the time. And so essentially co-ops were started because people had to, they had no choice. And so the whole premise of co-ops is self-help, doing things for yourself, mostly by yourself, because no one else will help you. And really, we see a lot of similarities in today's economy with precarious and gig work. And to be frank, a lack of interest from the current government in supporting the cooperative movement is no different as well.
No, indeed. And obviously, the cooperative movement was a hugely important and influential movement all those years ago. And it demonstrated really how solidarity and, working class coming together in solidarity can actually, in spite of a hostile government and economic circumstances which clearly don't favour the working class, and certainly that's the situation today, as you pointed out there, with the huge growth in precarious employment and so on. And I mean, you mentioned the Rochdale Pioneers, but I mean, how quickly did the cooperative movement spread at that time? Because I think obviously they called the Rochdale Pioneers because they were the first out of the traps, weren't they?
Yeah.
I know there's quite a long, where I've come from in Derby, there's a longer tradition of the cooperative movement here. But as a lad growing up, I mean, there seemed to be a lot more buy-in to, or a lot of awareness maybe of the cooperative movement. I still remember my divvy number, that mum and dad used to give when they, went to the local co-op, and there seemed to be a co-op in. This is a co-op shop, of course, in every local area. And I just wonder whether or not you see that there is an increasing interest in the cooperative movement now. I mean, obviously, you're different from the co-op shops in that sense. We're talking about worker cooperatives, and clearly in the Tony Benn era in the 1970s and so on, there was a big push in relation to cooperatives, but I don't know whether or not the support for that seems to have ebbed away a bit from central government. Would you think, or not, in terms of support for the cooperative and worker cooperatives?
Yeah. So back in 1844, they basically they became a cooperative movement because they were a very successful business. Essentially, there were attempts to set up self-help, democratically owned organisations before that point, and to be frank, most of them had failed. What the co-op pioneers did is they got the DNA of how to run a cooperative organisation right. One member, one vote. The dividend and lots of other parts of that DNA that were successful. And then they essentially, the other thing that made them a success in a movement, as opposed to just one business, was the penny post. And so the original pioneers, because they were so proud of what they've done and people were very interested in what they've achieved, they essentially, through letters, passed the message around the whole country. And so, the growth of the co-op movement was slower back then because technology was different. And it did take, decades to get up to the numbers of the thousands, but it did get there. Whereas nowadays, obviously, good ideas can travel much quicker than they used to. And I suppose the one thing I tend to say about, and you're right about the co-op movement in the UK, it's not as strong as it could be and not as strong as it was. At one point, the co-op, the retail shops you talked about, they had about 30% of the grocery sector. They were huge. Everybody had, as you say, everybody had a co-op shop near them. And, things happen, competition happens, things move on. But what's really important, I suppose, for us to remember in the UK, and I use the analogy of football, which is a terrible analogy, but works, which is we invented football, but actually we're pretty terrible at football now compared to other countries. And we're the same with co-ops, is we invented co-ops and we shared the message about co-ops and the model of co-ops with the world. And other parts of the world are so much better at co-ops than we are, whether it's France or Germany or Spain in the UK, in the EU, or whether it's places like India, which just have tremendous cooperative economies. And I think it's worth not looking at what can be achieved when you look at the UK sector, but looking at what can be achieved when you look at, say, India. So in India, there's a farmer co-op owned by the farmers with 60 million members. That's 60 million farmers, all part of one co-op in India. And it just tells you the scale that co-ops can reach. Oddly enough, in America, the rural electric, the electric utility, most of the rural electric economy is co-ops. When you move to places like France, quite a lot of champagne, oddly enough, is marketed through farmer co-ops. And so really, the co-op economy around the world is huge. Is a huge part of people's lives. There's about 3 million co-ops around the world, and about 1 billion people are members of co-ops around the world. And so when you look at those sorts of stats, you kind of think, why aren't there as many co-ops in the UK as there could be? And yeah, I would say it's because in lots of other countries, the governments of any political persuasion are more supportive towards co-ops because they see them as a fundamental good. They're there for people. They're not there for capital, and that's the big. There's one way you can say why is a co-op business different than any other business. I would say it's because the people who are most important, people are most important to the business, not capital. It's labor over capital, and that's.
Yeah, I was going to say, because one of the things that we are very keen on supporting, and obviously one of the reasons why we've brought you on this evening to talk about cooperatives within the aims and objectives of the resistance movement that we are trying to build now, is a very strong commitment to supporting the establishment of cooperatives. None of the steering committee, there with all due respect to them, I don't think any of us have got the expertise, as it were, but we are in support of the principle. So I wonder whether or not you might be able to sort of set out the kind of work that you do in terms of, if everybody's listening in now and thinking, actually, I'm quite attracted by this, but I'm not quite sure where to start. I mean, what would people do? How would they sort of go about establishing, and what kind of support can your organisation offer to people who are interested in establishing a co-op?
Yeah, and that's why we do things like this. The biggest issue with co-ops is awareness. People don't know about them, and I think particularly professionals who set up companies and businesses for people don't know about them, and so it's never really an option put forward. And so, how do you set up a co-op? The obvious thing is you need 2 people, at least 2 people, hopefully 3 or 4 people, and really it's about any other organisation. What's it there for? It's there to solve a problem. It's there to solve a problem that you probably can't solve on your own. And so any co-op organisation starts from that premise of, I've got a need as an individual that I can't deal with on my own, so I will work with some other people, and together with our shared skills, our shared resources, we'll work together to meet all of our shared need. That might, in the case of a worker co-op, obviously that's usually the need, as I've said before, for decent work and a job, but it might be to solve a particular community problem. So we work particularly at the moment with a lot of people where the last pub in the village is closed, or the last shop in the village is closed, and they've got no other alternatives, and so the community get together and save the pub or save the shop. And we're setting up a lot of co-ops like that at the moment. Or another example is cycle couriers, which is particularly hot at the moment, or taxi drivers, where we're working with, it's a French app, actually. A French co-op has set up a app to support cycle couriers to get together and do business together and get business together. And we're working with co-ops in York and Birmingham at the moment of cycle couriers, and it's essentially, so that
could be like an alternative to Deliveroo then, or something like that. Is that
exactly? Yeah. So
I guess taxi drivers similarly could benefit, couldn't the Uber taxi drivers? Would that be a possibility, do you think?
Yeah, and so that we're at the moment there's growth, particularly of co-ops where people are particularly hard done to. In essence, that's where self-help tends to come to the fore. If you can just work for a fairly nice, fairly ethical business and not go to the hassle of setting up your own business, then you probably would choose that option first because it's less hassle. Whereas if you feel like you're hard done to, you feel like you're taken advantage of, that tends to be when people make the effort to set up their own cooperative, their own business. And so, yeah, and there's a lot of work, obviously, I know the IWW union's doing a lot of work with to support delivery people at the moment. And so, yeah, we're co-ops tend to come in after the unions have had their go, if that makes sense. So we work a lot with unions who are trying to mobilize workforces for decent work, and when the organization doesn't play ball, that's when cooperatives come in as an alternative, where it's like, we'll do this ourselves, thank you very much. And so taxi drivers is another example. Also quite a lot of
oh, go on, sorry. No, carry on, John.
The precarious work around creative agencies, professional agencies. So again, those sorts of freelancers, web designers, creative types. We're doing a lot of work in those sorts of sectors where, again, it's just gig work. They're just getting piecemeal work from time to time. Yet if they got all the job, they'd get paid a lot more. So we're doing a lot of work to grow cooperatives of creative workers, essentially. And what does that look like? Like I said, it's getting 2 or 3 people in a pub or in a cafe to talk to each other, to share the issue they've got. And it's like a lot of other businesses start. You've got that passion to set up a business. The difference is you're setting up a business with some other people, and it's really like setting up no other business. What's your business idea? Have you got the skills to do it? All that sort of stuff. And what Cooperatives UK and our advisors, where we come in, is we basically help them with the technical advice and support. So we can't help somebody with a business idea. That's their job. But as soon as they've got a business idea and they think it's viable, that's where we come in. We help them with the marketing, the legal structures, the financial models, all that sort of advice and support. But then because it's also a co-op, we do.
Do you provide finance or?
Not directly. We work with other organisations. There's for specifically worker co-ops, there's an organisation called Cooperative and Community Finance, and they lend money. They lend money to worker co-op startups. We also help cooperatives raise finance from their members. So again, it's more difficult for a worker co-op if you've got a fairly small membership of workers. Whereas if you've got a community around you who are willing to support that endeavour, then we will help cooperatives raise finance from their local community. Or, it's a bit like crowdfunding. If you've got a really good idea and people think it's a good idea and want to support it, then you can do that through cooperative structures. And a lot, like I say, a lot of the community shops and pubs, putting up a wind turbine, stuff like that, you can raise cooperative finance to do. More difficult with worker co-ops. They tend to borrow money, and there are some cooperative specific lenders who will lend money to you. And really, that's our job. It's to get people's business models right and to give them that advice and support, and also help them work together. So, one of the big challenges of setting up a co-op, which is different than being an individual entrepreneur, is you have to work with other people. And so a lot of the advice and support we give is how to run an organisation democratically. It's one member, one vote at the end of the day. That's a core principle of a co-op. And so a lot of the work we do is helping people work with each other.
And your organisation, is it any type of a co-op that you work with? Or, I mean, so from manufacturing industry to a housing co-op, would you work with a housing co-op, for example, or not? Can you hear me?
So we work with virtually every sector.
Right.
Yeah, I can hear you. We work with virtually every sector. There's particular focus at the moment in the housing co-op sector, and like I've said, in the freelance gig economy. They're 2 of the stronger areas at the moment. Setting up a co-op without government support in that sense is harder in capital intensive businesses, because basically if you have to raise a lot of money, if you can't raise that money from government funds or government supported programs, that's really tough. So where cooperatives have been very successful in other countries in converting factories and in the manufacturing industry, it's where the government has provided central funds to support the buyout or the investment in that capital intensive business. So in the UK, because we don't have that sort of government support, co-ops tend to set up in sectors where you don't need a lot of capital to get going. So that's why it tends to be freelancer co-ops or those sorts of gig economy jobs where essentially as long as you've got a bike or a laptop or a car, that's all you need. So yeah,
Just in
those
terms
tend to be the areas we're supporting.
You made that point as well. I guess a lot of, and I think that's probably true. A lot of people, given the choice, would probably just go for the employer-employee relationship if the employer was, as you put it, a kind of decent employer, paying a reasonable salary and so on. But even in those circumstances, of course, inevitably the worker is generating surplus value. I mean, that's the kind of nature of capitalism, isn't it? And the thing about cooperatives is that everybody's got a equal stake in it, in a sense, and so the fruits of the workers' labours are more equitably distributed, aren't they? So it is a case for urging people, even in those circumstances where they are uh, reasonably content with the kind of employer-employee relationship, to look at a cooperative as an alternative model.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the interesting thing about co-ops is there's nothing fundamentally written down that co-ops are ethical, moral businesses. It's just weird in a way that if you've got a business which puts people before capital and the business is democratically owned, it's a funny thing that it tends to be a very moral, ethical organization. It tends to work in sectors which are sustainable, that have, the people who run co-ops tend to be more interested in environmental and social issues, not because it's part of the DNA of the co-op. The co-op's just a business form, a legal form. It's because when you allow people that autonomy to do what they want to do and the way they want to do it, funnily enough, they tend to do it in a moral way, and it kind of gives me quite a lot of faith in human nature. And so, yeah, a lot of co-ops, I would say, they are just a better way of running your business, whatever your business is. And that business will probably be more environmentally friendly, more sustainable. Will probably have better, even if it's not a worker co-op, even if it's a traditional consumer-owned co-op, will think and care about its employees more than the average business, because that's just the nature of the business it's in. And yeah, specifically for worker co-ops, the whole point of setting up a worker co-op is decent pay. There's a great example near me in West Yorkshire called Suma. Suma's a wholesale distribution business. Yeah, they have a massive warehouse with lorry drivers. They shift food about. They've been working very busy through the COVID situation. 400 employees, probably more like 50 million turnover business. So, sizable business. What makes them different as a worker co-op is they don't have a chief exec. They don't have this very well-paid management team. They have a flat management structure, and they have flat pay. So everybody in Suma, all 300 or 400 of them, get paid exactly the same wage. And what's crazy about that is in the warehouse. So most warehouse jobs are minimum wage. In Suma, it's 40 grand a year. Just let that sink in. Because they're a very successful business, because they're a very efficient, productive business, and because all the people in the organization share the roles out. So they do what's called multi-skilling. So they may spend part of the week in the warehouse shifting boxes about, and they might spend part of the week writing the comms and marketing strategy for the business, and likewise. So they mix labor intensive jobs and I suppose intellectual intensive jobs within and around the workforce, which means they can work very efficiently and they can pay themselves very well. And so I think they pay something like 40% more than the industry average for their industry. Yeah. And the only reason they can do that is because they're a worker co-op, and the profits of that business stay with the workers.
I mean, we look at that, and you say about people working in a warehouse and being paid a decent salary, and we see that as extraordinary. But of course, that ought to be the norm, really. And it's interesting as well that you mentioned Suma, and the model that they employ, because often you'll hear the right-wing skeptic saying you had a flat structure like that people wouldn't be motivated. You wouldn't get the talented people that you need. And yet Suma has been thriving for a long time. I was part of a whole food cooperative in Derby in the late 1970s, although Derby wasn't quite ready for the vegan whole food revolution in 1978. But we were supplied by Suma. Actually, so a number of the produce that we were selling was actually provided by Suma. I think we've now got Ross has actually joined us. Ross Ashcroft, I can see him. Hi, Ross. How are you? I'm pleased you've been able to join us.
I'm sorry it's taken so long. There's been some technical hitches this end, but we're here now.
Yeah, no worries. And yeah. Well, let me just give you the sort of big drum roll and intro. I think I did mention just before you well, not just before, but at the beginning of the program, said that obviously you're a broadcaster, co-founder of Renegade Inc. and the director of the seminal documentary The Four Horsemen, which shone a light on the broken banking system. And I was just talking to John there about the origins of the cooperative movement in Britain and the sort of work that his organization does in helping people who are interested in establishing co-ops. And I know obviously you're very interested in the cooperative movement yourself, and obviously the reason why I invited you to participate in the program this evening, Ross. And I wonder perhaps, I know when we spoke on the phone, we talked about the Mondragon experience in Spain, and I guess some people viewing may think that co-ops inevitably are a very small beer and kind of at best a kind of medium-sized enterprise. But I wonder whether you could say a little bit about your experience of Mondragon and how that started and where it sits now in the.
Well, look, the big thing about Mondragon was that it was never designed to be a commercial enterprise. And if you ever want to talk about socialism and people doing well for themselves and entrepreneurship and people, advancing their own economic needs because they have to, then you've got Jose Maria Alejandro, unpronounceable, but he's a wonderful man who ultimately was a Catholic priest in the Basque Country who started Mondragon, right? So, and every Saturday or Sunday morning he went and he took a Hessian bag around what would have been his Sunday school, and he started teaching people who were coming to Sunday school the basic points about entrepreneurship. So Mondragon, unlike so many cooperatives, I would argue every cooperative in the world doesn't ever start with a commercial interest. Every cooperative in the world starts with a human interest, and that eventually burgeons into a commercial interest, because ultimately when people get together and create value, it becomes a commercial prospect. So the Mondragon model, is unique, yeah, absolutely. But here's the killer point on all of it, and this might be really difficult to swallow. The Mondragon point and the Mondragon model and the Mondragon moment in time was because Franco absolutely put the Basque people to the knee, right? So Franco said, look, these people, because they were so rebellious, because they were so socialist, because they were so organized, Franco basically said, look, enough. So he wanted to starve, totally starve that group of people, and say, we have to vanquish you. And out of that desperation came cooperativism. And I hate to break this to you, but I don't think that in the West so far we have had the type of we've got inordinate amounts of inequality, we've got inordinate amounts of poverty, we've got inordinate amounts of social degradation, all that stuff, but we haven't had that moment. We haven't had that moment where people say, listen, we've got to collaborate now instead of compete. And, you know, Joseph Schumpeter talks about creative destruction. I think we've got a long, long way to go, 5, 7, 8 years to go, until people realize how broken they are and how they can't make an income, how they can't create value, how they can't get any returns, until they get to a point where they say, okay, fine, look, stop. We now need to collaborate. We now need to do this together. And I think that the Mondragon model only happened really is because the Basque people were absolutely on their knees, and a Catholic priest at that time came along and started teaching lessons of entrepreneurship, because he realized that trying to teach them from the Bible was futile.
Yeah. I mean, the question I posed at the top of the program, Ross, before you were able to join us was, do worker cooperatives have the potential to bring about an irreversible shift in the balance of wealth and power in Britain? Given what you've just said, notwithstanding the very high levels of inequality and poverty in Britain, do you think that's pie in the sky, or do you think there is some potential to?
Yeah, I think to be honest, I think it's really pie in the sky at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I was going to say, one of the things that our organisation is keen to support as part of our aims and objectives is to support the cooperative movement, and to, you know, help communities, encourage communities, particularly communities that are really struggling. I mean, you know, there are many up and down the country. You look at the coalfield communities, for example, where there is huge levels of poverty, maybe not on the scale that you were talking about in the Basque region in Franco's era, but there's very little in the way of any government investment going into those communities, very little opportunities for people, and you know, I'm hoping anyway certainly part of our objectives anyway is to try and work with communities when we can get beyond this lockdown, this COVID pandemic, to encourage and assist. And obviously John, in his role in the work that he does, we're hoping that, you know, that we can put people in touch with his organization to encourage and assist people to, you know, think about moving in the direction of a co-op. And I mean, what's your thoughts on that?
I don't think people are there yet, if I'm really honest. The big joke is,
what do we need to do to get people there?
Right. So I think the big joke around the cooperative movement is that the problem with the co-op movement is that it's not very cooperative and it doesn't move very much. And it's very difficult to tell people that they're going to be better off in a co-op when, for 40 years since Thatcher, basically you're better off staying at home and doing a bit of online betting or minimum wage work and all the rest of it, because your home will make more money than you do from you know, compound over 20 years from a wage perspective. And now that isn't always the case, but the point is that land speculation or house price speculation, or what we should call it in the proper terms, you know, what did Thatcher call it? That wonderfully deft term, property owning democracy.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Right.
Shareholding property owning democracy. Yeah.
Right. And shareholding. So now we've got this moment. Right. We've got this moment where that's worked for 40 years. Now it doesn't work anymore. So now you're pushing string. So now people, and this is the key point, don't have the luxury of competition. Right. So now you've got to start to collaborate. So all those 40 years, you can have all that competition. Estate agents would earn fees, bankers would earn fees, lawyers would earn fees, everyone would earn fees, and that would all buoy the economy. and it would create what we call the wealth effect, right? All gone. What are you going to do now? What are you going to do now? What are you going to put in place now after 40 years of Reaganomics or Thatcherism? What are you going to do now? Over to you.
Well, I don't think we can rely on government, and there was a stronger commitment, and I'll perhaps come back to that in a moment, in the Labour manifesto in 2017 in terms of what role the government could play. But I just wondered, John, how would you respond to some of the criticisms that Ross has outlined there?
So just to give I agree on Mondragon. Mondragon's a very special case, and there's no way you could recreate Mondragon in the UK. But you can look to other models from other countries. I think Emilia-Romagna in Italy is one of the regions where the co-op economy, in some parts, is about 30% of the local economy. And what that gives you, as I was told by a local, was it means that the rest of the economy has to behave itself a little bit more. So do I ever think the cooperative economy is going to be 100% of the private sector? No, of course it isn't. Do I think the co-op economy that's big enough and at enough scale in a diverse economy with other ownership structures to make sure that the wider market behaves itself? That would be my goal. And yeah, so I would love to live in a world where cooperatively owned businesses had 20 to 30% of the economy, because then you would have a situation where there was competition and people would have to be mindful of, you know, how they treated their workers, you know, how they treated their customers, etc. But I do agree it's a very, very long way away, and I do also agree that it's very hard to set up your own business. It's very hard to leave your current workplace, even if you're poorly treated. And to be frank, I do agree it has to get a lot worse before people are pushed into helping themselves, and that's just the nature of it. But I, of course, am hopeful that if people do help themselves, cooperative models are one of the best ways they could go in this instance.
In a way, it's slightly depressing listening to both of you, because you both seem to be extolling a counsel of despair, really, that it worries me and there's bugger all we can do. And I'm trying to be kind of, optimistic and say, look, it's about will, political will in the end. And if surely
no.
Go on.
No, that's absolute, Chris. Respectfully, that's absolute nonsense.
Okay.
It's not about political will. The political class have absolutely zero.
Let me just cut across you, Ross. I'm not talking about political will from the political class, as you put it. I'm talking about political will from organisations like ours within the communities. I mean, political, I suppose, in a sense, with a small p rather than a party political p. Part of the problem we've got is the failure of the political class, and it's left people, abandoned people. It's abandoned communities, abandoned their responsibility in a sense to create a good society. And look, surely the situation that confronted them, maybe it perhaps reiterates the points that you were both making, really, that the things were very, very desperate when the cooperative movement first started in this country 150 odd years ago. But the pressures, the difficulties for working class communities in those circumstances to establish the cooperative movement back then were greater than what the people are facing today. So if it was possible to do it then, with working class people,
Chris, and I admire you, but respectfully, I disagree.
Okay.
Look, the point here is that if you go back and let's just take this to the financial realm for a second, right? There's a man called Nick Ferrari who's talking this morning or yesterday morning on how the city drives the financial the country. The financial sector drives the country, right?
Yeah.
And you listen to that in the car on the way in, and you think this guy is clueless, because ultimately the city is a cost center for everybody, right? And nobody has got their head around this, not least the cooperative sector, right? So the City of London get this in your minds, is a cost center, isn't a value add, is a value subtract for everybody, right? Ferrari's there saying, oh, get everyone back to work. We need to get everyone back. Let's get the city working again. What he's saying is, get all the serfs back into the workplace, get the rentier economy going again, and let's get it all moving.
Mm.
That, to the cooperative movement, is a total anathema, right? Because it isn't about getting everything moving again. It's about reconstituting things on lines that are equitable to the stakeholders within those economies. And guess what? When I say that, shareholders absolutely terrified. Because they're like, well, where's my money? Mm. I've risked capital. They've risked nothing. I've risked capital. No, you haven't. You've risked a few quid. Yeah. But then what? So we have got before we even get to the cooperative movement, before we even get to Mondragon, before we even get to, we have got a massive education job to do on the difference between money and value, between the difference between currency and wealth. And you know, the hardest thing on all this, which genuinely breaks my heart, is that if you can go to workers and explain that, they'll agree with you. But here's the killer point. They haven't got the time to entertain the thought. Mm. And the beauty about cooperatives is that they give people huge amounts of space and time to be creative. They give people huge amounts of space and time to be reflective. They give people the opportunity to live, right? Mm. Let's go to Alan Greenspan. The optimum worker condition is to be nervous, neurotic, and insecure. Mm. And David Graeber was absolutely bang on this. He said, do you know what, Ross? At the first time in his life, Alan Greenspan's been honest.
Yeah. So I suppose the question that I put to both of you is, where do we, in the last 15 minutes, where do we go from here then? Do we just abandon any notion that we should support people or encourage people, or should we focus on education? What should the priority be, would you suggest then, in terms of taking this agenda forward? Perhaps I'll start with you, John, and then you can come back what you're thinking on that one, Ross.
So I'll go with two, but there's loads of things I could say. I'll say two things. Firstly, the co-op movement by its nature is a pragmatic movement. And so it started by people wanting to solve problems they had. And we will continue to work with individuals and small groups who have individual problems at a grassroots level that a co-op solution will help. And we'll just chip away at that. We'll continue to do it. We've done it for years. We'll continue. It would be fantastic if big thinkers and systematic changes can take place, but I'm not hopeful for that, and I will continue to work with small groups, small communities to help them where we can. And hopefully, if we chip away at that, that's one part of the solution. But yeah, that's not exciting. It's just boring practical work of helping people set co-ops up. The other thing which I'm mindful of is a lot of, I feel when I look back to the labour movement and what was successful is it was a very holistic approach to the person. So, you know, yes, there was the unions, yes, there was the co-op movement, but as well as all those things, they set social clubs up, they set up cycling clubs, they helped people with their education and fun. That's not, you know, the working men's clubs back in their day were about fun and about entertainment. And I think one of the things a lot of social movements nowadays have missed is they're too polarized, they're too separate, they support specific things. And I think the big thing for me that I think would change what we do is having a much more holistic approach to the person. You know, their education, their job, the fun they do in the evening, and bringing those communities together. Because if there's one thing we really have got a problem with, is it's the destruction of communities. whether they're local communities or just communities of people. And I think you're not going to solve this problem if you don't think about people holistically and all the issues they face. So co-ops, we will focus on the bit is about them helping themselves, businesses, and we really hope the other parts of and other social movements help individuals with those other parts of their lives to grow.
And where do the trade unions fit in this, John? Or don't they?
So for me, trade unions in workplaces which can't be co-ops for whatever reason, and trade unions definitely play their role. In workplaces where the trade union thinks they can mobilize the workforce to convert it into a co-op, we're all for that, and we'll work with those unions on that. And actually, within worker co-ops, some of the worker co-ops, particularly the larger worker co-ops, are unionized because unions play a role in any business. And so unions and co-ops can work with each other. There's no reason why they can't. It's just, should a trade union run a business? No, it shouldn't. It's there for the workers.
But a co-op's there for the workers as well, isn't it?
Yeah, but the co-op is there to run a business. The co-op is not always there for the individual, and sometimes the individual will fall out with their business, and that's where a trade union plays a role in a worker co-op. Inevitably, people fall out, and so there is a role for trade unions in worker co-ops.
Sure. Yeah. Ross, where do we go from here then? What's your prescription?
We embrace both. Look, the Germans have got it sort of right. The oligarchs, the 1%, however you want to define it in the West, have always talked about the fact that trickle down economics works. Well, turns out it's a total disaster. There's no academic research for it. It's a bunch of propaganda that trickle down is the way forward. If you look at Germany now, there's something really interesting happening, and has been really for the last 20 years. They've always maintained their unions in Germany, and that's unique, right? Because the Germans have understood that since the Second World War, unless you have the working class, the unions, the workers able to enter into the norms of the economy, right? Then you're not going to have an economy, because ultimately the bottom end of the economy dies and then everything else collapses. And in the UK, we've got a diametrically opposed situation. You've got the Duke of Westminster of late dying, and his son taking over, who's now a billionaire, and then the whole of the top of the social strata, if you like, thriving, whilst everything else withers on the vine, right? So in stats terms, if you want stats, you've got the top 3-4% of the economy thriving beyond belief, the bottom 25 to 30% of the economy not even able to enter into the norms of economic activity.
Yeah.
Progressive? Is that how we're going to roll? So the Germans or whoever have realized that you make sure that those unions are healthy. And this is an anathema to, imagine saying that to Thatcher.
Yes.
What? Unions are healthy? Imagine saying it to that clown that's in number 10 at the moment.
So what do we do, though? The point is, Ross, what do we do? We're in a situation now where we've got a Tory government in who are Thatcherite.
Organised. Look, you've got to really, and this might be not be right for this program and the rest of it. But here's the thing: you've got to ignore, as Jose Maria Azarlabara, who's unpronounceable, but Arizmana, Mondragon back in the Basque Country, you've got to ignore the political class. I promise you. You just got to put one thing in your mind from this conversation: is that every politician in the UK, at the end of the debt cycle, end of capitalism, end days of financialization, every politician is a colossal distraction. And if you don't think that regardless of the political hue, I mean, Keir Starmer is a case in point of someone who could be bought and sold like a piece of meat in a livestock auction, right? If you don't think that these guys are doing your bidding for you, you're nuts. So what you've got to do is ignore the political spectrum, the political class, everything about it, and you have to organize and get together and do your own thing. And my view is, provided people can park their egos and get over themselves and all that stuff, and if you can put together a worker co-op, or you can put together some sort of cooperative movement where you can gel together and something's bigger than yourself, then you're on the right road. Because ultimately what we're coming to the end of, and this is my last bit, is we're coming to the end game of financialized capitalism. 100%. Look at what's happening in the money markets. 2, we're coming to the end game, definitely, of Westminster. No one listens to them anymore. Like, literally no one. Look at it's a clown circus. And then the last point, we're coming to the end of education. So, and there's your killer point. So nobody now wants to come out of university with £250,000 worth of debt to go and become a lawyer or whatever. Everyone's now starting to look in different directions, and the opportunity and the onus, if I can put it that way, is for us as a generation of people, is to say to other people, say, look, there's a different way. There's a different way to go here. Because all that stuff that's happened over the last 40 years since Thatcher was actually built on hot air. And actually now we've got the ability to create real value, real wealth, which isn't just monetized all the time in house prices, wages, and all that nonsense. Actually, we've got the ability to recreate an economy where we can create real services, real products, real value, and offer it to you. And I think that when you start talking in those terms, it gets people really excited. So my view is, from a German model, yes, of course, you keep the unions going, but let's face it, she did such a good job on it, the Iron Lady, the unions in this country are finished. We need a new way to go. Co-ops are the way to do it. However, how do you marshal that? Where's the leadership? And how do you create them? It's actually a creative job. It's an architecture job. How do you create them in a way that enables them to create as much opportunity for all the people involved?
Well, look, we've only got 5 minutes left, and I'm just going to put one question that's coming from viewers, and we only got time for one question, but it sort of picks up on what you were just saying there, Ross. And it's this: how can we help as a community organization to educate people, then to kind of inspire people to get through this? I mean, perhaps if you could both give us a couple of minutes on that, and then we'll have to end. Any thoughts on that, John? And then we'll come back to Ross to finish off. What can we do?
So our big issue is awareness. Not enough people know that cooperatives are a realistic, viable model for providing decent livelihoods for you. And so I would say, go to our website, uk.coop, look at the case studies of the sorts of co-ops we set up, gig economy, freelancers, practical shops, pubs, farms, housing co-ops, credit unions. There's so many good, successful examples of co-ops. The issue is most people don't know about it. Yeah. And then the next issue is it's mobilizing those people to set them up. And I think for community organisers and mobilisers who are good at that, that's the skill the current co-op movement lacks. It's the ability to mobilise and organise people. We've got the skills of technically setting up co-ops, but we need the support of people who are really good at mobilising communities.
As an organisation, I'm just thinking about the resistance movement, the Festival of Resistance that we're trying to set up. We've got thousands of people up and down the country who are keen, who see that the political class is broken, that kind of our representative democracy isn't working, and they're looking for some alternative way forward, as it were. And maybe some of those in some areas, maybe not every area, but maybe there might be local champions who would be willing to try and mobilize and bring people together. I mean, what support could you offer support to people to do that, to be those kind of evangelicals, if I can put it like that, to go in and encourage people to look at setting co-ops up?
You want me to run a webinar boot camp or a physical boot camp where we take people through, an hour, anything from an hour to a full day's kind of boot camp on how to raise awareness of co-ops and how to get people started? We can do that.
So
about the co-op movement,
you're looking at setting up chapters up and down the country, and maybe that's one of the things that we could offer. If you're saying you'd be prepared to do that, then we may pick up a few people, maybe a lot of people who are on the ground, because this I don't think it can't be done by me. It can't be done from the centre. It needs to be done on the ground, doesn't it? So we need
exactly right.
So just finish us off in the last couple of minutes, then, Ross. In your thoughts, then.
Exactly right. People have to look. This isn't like co-ops aren't top down, right? And my frustration with the whole with the co-op movement, but also with the political classes, if we give a diktat from here, then eventually people will go and do it. No, absolute nonsense. Do you know the biggest thing? Do you know the most beautiful and elegant thing about co-ops? They find latent talent in areas that you'd never expect it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So I can sit in Westminster, Chris, as you were as an MP, and go, oh, we're going to do this in Derby. Oh, yeah. Scousers like toffee, so we'll make a toffee shop. I mean, nonsense, right? Nonsense. You go out to the area, you go out to those people and you say, what do you need to do here? And the absolute beauty of co-ops is that it brings out of people the innate talent and beauty within them, which allows them to express that to the wider community, which ultimately gives everybody, not just the person giving it, meaning and purpose. Mm. And guess what I never talked about in all of that?
Go on.
Money.
No.
Right.
No, interesting. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And now we talk. And now we talk, because it's not about money. It's not about redevelopment. It's not about house prices. It's not about property owning, democracy, and all the rest of it. It's about meaning and purpose. So if you really want really wonderful, vibrant, beautiful communities where people could, and I'm not being utopian. I've looked into co-ops a lot. I understand that in capitalist terms, it's called the USP, a unique selling point, right? The unique selling point about bloody co-ops is that it finds latent talent in areas that, and by the way, that often the people in those areas didn't even know they had it, and then they gift it forward, and this whole thing emerges. Exactly how Mondragon happened.
Yeah.
So forget this top-down nonsense. Forget all this. Oh, we're gonna come and help you. Ronald Reagan, the worst 9 words in the history of the English, British, whatever language is, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. They've never ever once helped. The government's a ham-fisted disaster, as we all know. The beauty. Let's talk about the poetry, the harmony of co-ops. The beauty is that they find latent talent within that area, bring it out, and it creates more community value.
Well, look, that's a great note to end on. Thank you very much indeed. We have run out of time. In fact, we've gone slightly over time. I'm grateful to both John and to Ross. That was a really challenging program, and I don't know about anybody watching, but I was kind of knocked down, and then you built me back up again. I was kind of quite depressed and thought it was just a counsel of despair, but I thought it was really inspiring what you were both saying at the end there. And hopefully we've got some practical outcomes from this discussion this evening. And as we build this movement and as we create local chapters, if we can inspire people, if they feel switched on, that cooperative in their local area might be something that will work. But these solutions need to come from the bottom up, and it's wonderful to know that John is offering himself and his organisation as a resource for that. And And hopefully, Ross, we can get you on the case as well as a kind of a motivational speaker. So thank you both very much indeed for your contributions this evening. I'm sorry about the technical difficulties you experienced, Ross, in getting on to the program at the outset, but it's great to have you, albeit for a truncated period for the program. Thanks everybody for tuning in this evening. Don't forget to tune in to Resistance TV at the same time, same place next week. Thank you for watching and good night.